March 8, 1975. Madison Square Garden press conference. Joe Frazier had just called Muhammad Ali's late mother a whore who raised a coward. The room went dead silent. Security cameras captured what happened next for exactly 30 seconds. Then the feed mysteriously cut. 3 witnesses saw Ali's reaction. 2 of them never spoke about it again. The 3rd man disappeared that same night and was found floating in the Hudson River a week later. The official cause of death, accidental drowning. For 47 years, those 30 seconds remained buried. The FBI file stayed classified. The witnesses stayed silent. And Muhammad Ali never spoke Joe Frazier's name in public again. But someone recorded everything that night. Someone kept the evidence. And now, decades later, they want the world to know what really happened when the greatest heard those words about his mother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The VHS tape arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 47 years to the date. Muhammad Ali sat in his leather chair by the window of his Louisville estate, watching the Kentucky bluegrass bend in the wind. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the Parkinson's that had been slowly stealing pieces of him for decades. The disease had taken his voice to a whisper, his movements to careful, deliberate gestures. But it hadn't touched his memory, especially not the memories he wished it would erase. Lonnie, his wife, had brought the package to him with concern creasing her brow. No return address, just his name written in block letters across brown paper wrapping. Inside, a single VHS cassette and a letter typed on plain white paper. "Dear Champ," it began. "I think it's time the world knew what really happened to Jerry Castellano." Ali's blood turned to ice water. Jerry Castellano, the freelance photographer who'd been working the Madison Square Garden press conference that night in 1975. The man who'd kept his camera rolling when all the others stopped. The man who'd captured 30 seconds that were supposed to stay buried forever. The man who'd ended up face down in the Hudson River. Ali's fingers, shaking more now than usual, continued reading. "You thought the evidence was gone. You thought Jerry took your secret to the bottom of that river. But Jerry was smart. He made copies. He hid them. And before he died, he told someone where to find them. I have the footage, Muhammad. All 30 seconds. I have the audio, too. Every word you said, every threat you made. I know what you did to him after the cameras stopped rolling. I know why he really died. You have 72 hours to decide. Confess publicly what happened that night, or I release everything. The footage, the audio, the photographs of Jerry's body that the police never made public. The ones showing the bruises that didn't come from drowning. The world deserves to know their hero isn't who they think he is. A friend of Jerry's." Ali let the letter fall to his lap. Through the window he could see the lake where he used to run, back when his legs could carry him like lightning, back when he was the greatest. Now he felt like the oldest man alive, carrying the weight of decades. He thought about that night constantly. Had for 47 years. Joe Frazier's words echoing in his head, "Your mama was a whore who raised a yellow coward." Words that had cut deeper than any punch, deeper than any defeat in the ring. Words about the woman who'd taught him to box, who'd believed in him when no one else would, who'd died just 3 months before that press conference. What happened next? Those 30 seconds. They weren't supposed to define him, but they had, in ways no one could see. Every title defense after that, every public appearance, every moment when the world called him the greatest, it all felt hollow because he knew what he was capable of when pushed too far. Jerry Castellano had seen it all. The photographer had kept rolling when everyone else stopped, when security was rushing to separate them, when the room exploded into chaos. He'd captured Ali's face in that moment, not the composed champion the world knew, but something darker. Something that proved Joe Frazier's words had found their mark and unleashed something terrible. After the cameras officially stopped, Ali had cornered Jerry in the hallway. The conversation started as a plea. "Please don't use that footage. Please protect my reputation." But Jerry had smiled, that greedy little smile, and talked about bidding wars and tabloid money. He'd talked about how much certain networks would pay for footage of Muhammad Ali losing control. That's when the conversation became something else entirely. Ali pushed the memory away, the way he'd done thousands of times before, but now someone knew. Someone had been waiting, watching, planning, and they wanted more than money. They wanted confession. They wanted to destroy him. He picked up the VHS tape with trembling fingers. Part of him wanted to destroy it, throw it in the fireplace and pretend it never arrived. But another part, the part that had carried this secret like poison for 47 years, needed to see, needed to know exactly what evidence existed of his darkest moment. The tape was labeled simply, Jerry's Last Story. Ali loaded it into the player with slow, careful movements. His finger hovered over the play button as rain began to tap against the windows. Somewhere out there, someone was hunting him, not with fists or words, but with truth, the most dangerous weapon of all. He pressed play, and 47 years collapsed into nothing as March 8, 1975 came roaring back to life on his television screen. Joe Frazier's voice filled the room, saying those words again, the words that had cost a man his life and turned the greatest into something else entirely. The footage flickered to life in grainy color, the familiar chaos of that Madison Square Garden press room materializing like a fever dream. Ali watched himself, young, powerful, invincible, lean forward at the long table covered in microphones, watched Joe Frazier, thick and scowling, his left eye still damaged from their first fight, settling into the chair beside him like a coiled spring. The sound quality was poor, but Ali could make out every word. He'd heard them in his nightmares for decades. Your mama was a whore who raised a yellow coward. On screen, Ali's face changed. The showman's mask cracked, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath. The camera caught it all, the way his hands clenched, the way his jaw tightened, the exact moment when Muhammad Ali stopped being a performer and became something else entirely. Ali reached for the remote with trembling fingers and paused the tape. He couldn't watch the rest. Not yet. Not the part where he lunged across that table, or where security struggled to pull him off Frazier, or where Jerry Castellano's camera kept rolling while everyone else stopped filming. The house creaked around him, settling into the late afternoon quiet. Outside, the March wind stirred the bare branches of the oak trees his mother had loved. She'd visited this house only once, a year before her death, but she'd sat under those trees and told him how proud she was, how he'd made something beautiful of his life. If she could see him now, 72 years old, shaking from disease and fear, haunted by what he'd become after her death, would she still be proud? Footsteps approached from the kitchen, soft and familiar. Lonnie appeared in the doorway, her dark hair touched with silver, worry etched in the lines around her eyes. She'd been his anchor for over 3 decades, the one person who'd seen him at his weakest and chosen to stay. "Muhammad, you've been in here for hours." Her voice carried that gentle firmness he'd learned to recognize. "You missed lunch." He gestured weakly toward the television, the frozen image of his younger self twisted with rage. Just watching old fights. Lonnie moved closer, and he could smell her perfume, the same scent she'd worn on their wedding day, the same one that had pulled him back from dark places more times than he could count. She glanced at the screen, then at the letter crumpled in his lap. "That's not a fight," she said quietly. "That's the press conference, the one you never talk about." Ali's throat tightened. Lonnie knew pieces of that night, knew about Frazier's cruelty, knew it had wounded him deeper than any physical blow. But she didn't know about Jerry Castellano, didn't know about the 30 seconds that came after, or the conversation in the hallway, or why a photographer ended up dead in the Hudson River 3 days later. She didn't know that her husband, the man she'd built a life with, the man she'd nursed through his disease, the man she'd defended against every critic and doubter, was a killer. "Lonnie," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The Parkinson's made everything harder, but this was different. This was the weight of decades pressing down on his vocal cords. What if everything people believe about me is wrong?" She sat on the arm of his chair, her hand finding his shoulder. "What do you mean?" Ali closed his eyes. Through the window, he could hear their neighbors' children playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the wind, normal sounds of a normal life. The life he'd tried to build on top of his secret, like flowers planted over a grave. What if the greatest was just a lie I told so many times I started to believe it? Lonnie's fingers traced the back of his neck, the way she did when he woke from nightmares. "You're not a lie, Muhammad. You're the most honest man I know." The irony cut through him like a blade. He wanted to tell her everything, about Jerry, about that night, about the man who'd threatened to expose him, but the words wouldn't come. After 47 years of silence, the truth felt too large for his failing voice. Instead, he reached for her hand and held it against his cheek. Her skin was warm, real, present. Whatever happened in the next 72 hours, whatever his blackmailer demanded, he had to protect this, had to protect her from learning what he really was. "I love you," he managed. "I know." She kissed the top of his head. "Whatever's troubling you, we'll face it together. We always do." But Ali knew this was different. This wasn't a diagnosis or a financial problem or public criticism. This was justice, finally catching up. Jerry Castellano's friend, whoever they were, wanted him to confess not just to the world, but to himself, wanted him to admit that beneath all the poetry and politics and principle, beneath all the stands he'd taken and causes he'd championed, lived a man capable of murder. The truth was coming, whether he was ready or not. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. Ali had been awake anyway, staring at the ceiling while Lonnie slept beside him, her breathing steady and peaceful. The sound cut through the darkness like a blade, and he knew, with the certainty that comes from carrying guilt for 47 years, that this wasn't a wrong number or a medical emergency. This was about Jerry Castellano. He reached for the bedside phone with shaking fingers, his movements careful to avoid waking his wife. The receiver felt impossibly heavy as he lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice was barely a whisper, roughened by the Parkinson's and fear. "Did you watch the tape, champ?" The voice was electronically distorted, neither male nor female, just a mechanical ghost speaking from his past. Ali's blood turned cold. He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. "Who is this?" "I told you, a friend of Jerry's. The question is, are you ready to be honest about what happened that night?" Ali's eyes found the darkened hallway beyond their bedroom door. Somewhere down there, the VHS tape sat in his player, frozen on his moment of rage, the moment that had led to everything else. "I don't know what you think you know. I know you followed Jerry to the parking garage after the press conference. I know you cornered him by his car. I know what you said to him, and I know what you did when he laughed in your face." The words hit Ali like physical blows. His chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. No one else had been there. No one else had seen Jerry's smug smile when he'd demanded $50,000 for the footage, or heard him mock Ali's mother again, calling her a dead whore who raised a crazy nigger. No one else had witnessed what came next. "You're lying," Ali managed, but his voice betrayed him, cracking like a teenager's. "Jerry was smart, Muhammad. Smarter than you gave him credit for. He wore a wire that night. Did you know that? He'd been working on a story about corruption in boxing, recording conversations with fighters and promoters. The wire was still running when you put your hands around his throat." Ali's vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt around him, and he had to grip the nightstand to keep from falling. 47 years of believing he'd been careful, that no evidence existed beyond Jerry's camera footage. 47 years of thinking the secret had died with Jerry in that black water. "I have everything, champ," your voice clear as day. "You talk about my mama again, I'll kill you." Jerry laughing. The sound of you hitting him, his voice getting weaker, the splash when you threw him in the river. He was already dead. The words escaped before Ali could stop them, a confession torn from somewhere deep inside. "I didn't mean..." He fell, hit his head. I panicked." The distorted voice chuckled, a sound like grinding metal. "There it is, the truth. Finally." Ali looked at Lonnie's sleeping form, her face peaceful in the moonlight. She stirred slightly, and he held his breath until she settled again. Everything he'd built, everything he'd protected, balanced on a knife's edge. "What do you want?" he whispered. "Justice. Jerry died for trying to expose who you really are, a violent man hiding behind pretty words about peace and love. His family never knew what happened to him. They spent 40 years wondering, grieving, thinking he'd killed himself. His family? Jerry had a daughter, Muhammad. Did you know that? She was 7 years old when her daddy disappeared. She's 54 now, still wondering why he never came home, still believing he abandoned her." The revelation hit Ali like a sledgehammer to the chest. A daughter. A little girl who'd grown up without a father because of 30 seconds of rage. Because Muhammad Ali, who'd spoken out against war, who'd sacrificed his career for his principles, had killed a man and thrown him away like garbage. You have 48 hours left, champ. Make it right, or I make it public. The footage, the audio, the photographs of Jerry's body, everything. Let his daughter finally know the truth about what happened to her father. The line went dead. Ali sat in the darkness, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone like a death knell. His secret was no longer his own. Somewhere out there, Jerry Castellano's friend, or his daughter, or someone else who'd loved him, was waiting for justice. The greatest had become the hunted. And for the first time in 47 years, Muhammad Ali wasn't sure he could fight his way out of the corner they'd backed him into. Because this time, his opponent wasn't another boxer, or a government, or a disease. This time, he was fighting the truth. Ali set the phone back in its cradle with exaggerated care, as if the slightest sound might shatter the fragile silence that protected his sleeping wife. The digital clock's red numerals burned like accusation. 3:52 a.m. In the darkness, his mind raced through possibilities, desperate strategies, the kind of mental footwork that had once made him untouchable in the ring. This was just another fight. Had to be. Everything was a fight if you looked at it right. Disease, age, doubt. He'd beaten them all before. This blackmailer, this ghost from Jerry Castellano's past, they wanted something. Everyone always wanted something. Money, recognition, revenge. There had to be an angle, a way to slip the punch and counterstrike. He spent the remaining hours until dawn constructing plans in his head. Hire private investigators to find the caller. Contact the FBI. Frame it as extortion against a former champion. Claim the evidence was fabricated, deep-faked, the desperate fiction of someone seeking to destroy an American icon. The Muhammad Ali the world knew would never hurt anyone. The Muhammad Ali who'd sacrificed his prime years for principle, who'd lit the Olympic torch with shaking hands, who'd become the most beloved athlete in history. That Muhammad Ali was bulletproof. By morning, Ali had almost convinced himself the night had been a fever dream. The Parkinson's medication sometimes caused vivid nightmares. The stress of aging, of watching his body betray him piece by piece, could manifest in paranoid fantasies. As Lonnie prepared his breakfast, steel-cut oats with honey, the way his mother used to make, he nearly managed to smile. "You look better," Lonnie observed, setting the bowl before him. More rested. "Feel stronger," he lied, his voice gaining some of its old confidence. Maybe I just needed to face some old ghosts. But when the doorbell rang at 10 a.m., the carefully constructed wall of denial crumbled. Howard Bingham stood on the front porch, his camera bag slung over his shoulder out of decades-old habit, though he rarely worked anymore. Ali's oldest friend and former personal photographer looked haggard, his usually warm eyes clouded with something that might have been fear. "Howard?" Ali opened the door wider, inviting him in. "What brings you out here so early?" Howard glanced over his shoulder at the empty driveway, a gesture so subtle Ali almost missed it. When he spoke, his voice carried an uncharacteristic tremor. "Muhammad, we need to talk, privately." They settled in Ali's study, away from Lonnie's curious glances. Howard declined the offered chair, instead pacing to the window that overlooked the lake. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, something Ali hadn't seen him do in 20 years. "Someone came to see me yesterday," Howard said without turning around. "Asked about Jerry Castellano." Ali's blood crystallized in his veins. "Jerry who?" Howard's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't lie to me, Muhammad. Not after everything we've been through." The silence stretched between them, 47 years of friendship balanced against 47 years of buried truth. Howard had been there that night, working the press conference, part of Ali's inner circle. He'd seen the aftermath, Ali's shaken state, his insistence on leaving immediately, his refusal to discuss what had happened with Frazier. This person, Howard continued, his back still to Ali, they had photographs, old ones, from that night. Security camera footage from the parking garage. Ali gripped the arms of his chair. "What kind of photographs?" "The kind that show you following Jerry to his car. The kind that show you two talking. The kind that show you looking over your shoulder afterward, checking if anyone saw." Howard finally turned, and Ali saw tears in his old friend's eyes. They asked if I knew what happened to Jerry, if I knew why he disappeared, if I knew what you did. What did you tell them?" "I told them to go to hell." Howard's voice broke. "But Mohammed, I've carried this weight for 47 years, wondering, suspecting, watching you wake up screaming from nightmares you never talked about, seeing you flinch every time someone mentioned Jerry's name." Ali tried to speak, but no words came. The Parkinson's had stolen his voice completely, leaving him as mute as he'd been stunned that night when Jerry's body hit the water. "I protected you," Howard whispered. "When the police came asking questions about Jerry, I gave you an alibi, said you were with me the whole time after the press conference. I lied to protect my friend." He stubbed out his cigarette with violent force. "But I can't protect you from this. Whoever they are, they have evidence, real evidence, the kind that puts people in prison." Howard moved toward the door, then stopped. When he looked back, his face was that of a stranger, someone who'd loved Muhammad Ali but was no longer certain who Muhammad Ali was. "They're coming for you, champ. And after seeing those photographs, maybe they should." The door closed behind him with funeral finality, leaving Ali alone with the wreckage of his last hope. Even Howard, loyal, devoted Howard, who'd documented every triumph and defended every controversy, had seen enough to doubt. Ali was truly alone now, with 48 hours and a truth that was closing in like a fighter he could no longer outrun. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, each note reverberating through Ali's chest like a funeral bell. He sat motionless in his study, staring at the door Howard had closed with such finality, trying to process what friendship looked like when it died. 47 years of loyalty, severed by a handful of photographs and the terrible weight of moral certainty. Howard had lied for him once, had given him an alibi without being asked, had looked police officers in the eye and sworn Muhammad Ali was nowhere near that parking garage. But that was when Howard could still believe in the man he'd chosen to follow, when the possibility of innocence outweighed the growing evidence of guilt. Now even that last guardian had walked away. Ali's hands trembled as he reached for the phone, muscle memory guiding him through a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. The ringing seemed to last forever before a gruff voice answered. Dundee. Angelo Dundee, his trainer, his corner man, the architect of his greatest victories. If anyone would stand by him now, it would be Angelo. "It's Mohammed." A pause. Then warmth flooded the old trainer's voice. "Champ, how you feeling? Lonnie taking good care of you?" "Angelo." Ali's voice cracked. "I need help." The change was immediate. Angelo had heard that tone before, in dressing rooms before impossible fights, in hospital rooms after brutal beatings, in courtrooms when the government tried to destroy him. This was Muhammad Ali at the end of his rope. "What's wrong, kid?" "Someone's coming after me. About something that happened long ago, something I—" The words died in his throat. "How do you tell your trainer, the man who'd guided you through 3 decades of battles, that your greatest fight had been against your own conscience?" "Mohammed, talk to me." That night in '75, after the Frazier press conference. "Do you remember Jerry Castellano?" Silence stretched across the phone line. When Angelo finally spoke, his voice had gone cold. "The photographer who disappeared." "Yeah, what about him?" Ali closed his eyes, seeing again Jerry's face in those final moments, arrogant, even as Ali's hands closed around his throat, smiling even as the life left his eyes. "Angelo, what if I told you that everything people believe about me is a lie? I'd say you're the most honest man I ever knew. Honest to a fault. Cost you 3 years of your career being honest." The irony was unbearable. Muhammad Ali, the man who'd sacrificed everything for his principles, asking his trainer to believe in an honesty that was itself a 47-year deception. But what if— "Muhammad." Angelo's voice carried the authority of a man who'd cornered champions. "I don't know what's got you spooked, but I know you. Knew you when you were Cassius Clay and scared of your own shadow. Knew you when you became Muhammad Ali and decided to face down the whole world. Whatever happened that night, whatever you think you did or didn't do, it doesn't change who you are. You don't understand. I understand plenty. I understand you got enemies who'd love to see you fall. Understand there's people who never forgave you for being right about Vietnam, for being proud and black and unafraid. They've been trying to tear you down for 50 years, and they ain't succeeded yet. Ali wanted to scream, wanted to shatter the phone against the wall, to rage against the terrible kindness in Angelo's voice. His trainer was defending a man who didn't exist, fighting for a reputation built on the bones of Jerry Castellano. Angelo, I killed him. The words escaped like a death rattle, barely audible even to Ali himself. He wasn't sure he'd actually spoken them until Angelo's sharp intake of breath confirmed they'd traveled across the phone line and landed like a bomb in the old trainer's world. The silence that followed lasted an eternity. When Angelo finally spoke, his voice was different. Careful, wounded, aged a decade in 30 seconds. Mohammed, what are you saying? I'm saying Jerry Castellano didn't disappear. I killed him, with my bare hands, threw his body in the Hudson River like garbage. Each word felt like swallowing glass. And someone knows, someone has proof. Another long pause. Ali could hear Angelo's labored breathing, could almost see the old man's mind struggling to reconcile the Muhammad Ali he'd loved with the confession he'd just heard. Why? Angelo whispered. He was going to sell footage of me attacking Frazier, was going to destroy everything we'd built. And he said things about my mother, things that made me... Ali's voice failed completely. The line went quiet, except for the sound of two old men trying to breathe around the weight of shattered faith. When Angelo spoke again, his voice carried a finality that Ali recognized from the corner of boxing rings, when fights were over and couldn't be won. I can't help you with this one, champ. The dial tone was the loneliest sound Muhammad Ali had ever heard. Ali stared at the silent phone, the dial tone still echoing in his ears like a death sentence. The study felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of abandonment. First Howard, now Angelo. The two men who'd stood by him through everything, government persecution, religious conversion, the long decline into illness, had walked away within hours of learning the truth. He set the receiver down and noticed his reflection in the black screen of the television across the room. A broken old man in an expensive house, haunted by a ghost he'd created with his own hands. The Parkinson's tremor seemed worse now, his left hand shaking with what looked like guilt made visible. The phone rang. Ali's heart hammered as he lifted the receiver, expecting the electronically distorted voice of his tormentor. Instead, he heard something worse. The warm, concerned tone of his daughter Hannah. Dad? Angelo just called me. He sounded upset, said I should check on you. Of course. Angelo wouldn't abandon him completely, wouldn't leave him to face this alone without ensuring someone was watching. Even in his disgust and disappointment, the old trainer was still protecting his fighter the only way he could. I'm fine, baby girl. You don't sound fine. You sound like you did after the Parkinson's diagnosis. Scared. Scared. Such a simple word for the terror that was eating him alive from the inside. Ali had faced down Sonny Liston when the world called him invincible, had stared down the U.S. government when they tried to destroy him, had looked death in the face every time he stepped into a ring. But he'd never been this frightened, because this time he was the monster. Dad, whatever's happening, you can tell me. We're family. Family. The word hit him like a physical blow. Jerry Castellano had family too. A daughter who'd been 7 years old when her father disappeared, who'd spent 47 years wondering why he'd never come home. How many nights had that little girl cried herself to sleep, convinced her daddy had abandoned her? How many birthdays had she waited by the window, hoping he'd remember and return? Hannah, do you remember when you were little, and I'd tell you stories about being brave, about standing up for what's right? Of course. You always said the hardest fights were against ourselves. The irony was unbearable. Ali had spent decades preaching about conscience and courage, about the importance of moral strength. He'd become an icon precisely because people believed he'd rather sacrifice everything than compromise his principles. But it had all been built on a lie. Every speech about peace, every stand against violence, every moment of moral authority, all of it tainted by 30 seconds of rage that had cost a man his life. Dad, you're scaring me. I have to go, baby. Tell your mother I love her. Tell everyone. But how do you finish that sentence? Tell everyone I'm sorry. Tell everyone I lied. Tell everyone the greatest was the greatest fraud. I'll call you back, he managed, and hung up before she could respond. Alone again, Ali walked to the window overlooking the lake where he'd found peace for so many years. The water was calm, reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. Nothing like the black Hudson River that had swallowed Jerry Castellano 47 years ago. He thought about that night constantly now, the details sharp as broken glass. Jerry's laughter when Ali confronted him, the casual cruelty in his voice, as he'd demanded $50,000 for the footage, then raised it to $100,000 when he saw Ali's desperation. The way he'd smiled when he repeated those words about Ali's mother, savoring each syllable like candy. "What are you gonna do, champ?" Jerry had said, still grinning even as Ali's hands found his throat. "Hit me? The great peaceful Muhammad Ali? The man who won't fight a war but fights everyone else?" That was the line that broke everything. The observation that exposed the fault line in Ali's carefully constructed moral identity. He'd refused to kill strangers in Vietnam but had no problem destroying Joe Frazier in press conferences. He'd claimed to be a man of peace while making a living through violence. Jerry had seen the hypocrisy first, had recognized the rage that lived behind all those pretty words about love and brotherhood. In that moment of cruel clarity, he'd revealed a truth that Ali had spent decades hiding from himself. The irony was that Jerry had been right. Ali wasn't the peaceful icon the world believed him to be. He was exactly what Jerry had called him, a violent man hiding behind pretty words. And now Jerry's daughter deserved to know what had happened to her father, deserved to understand that Muhammad Ali, the man whose courage the world celebrated, had been too cowardly to confess his crime for 47 years. Ali closed his eyes and made his decision. Some fights couldn't be won. Some corners were too tight to escape. It was time to stop running from the truth. The decision settled over Ali like a shroud, bringing with it an unexpected calm. For 47 years he'd carried the weight of that night, and now, finally, he was going to set it down. The tremor in his hands subsided slightly, as if his body recognized the approaching end of its long vigil. He moved slowly to his desk, each step deliberate, and pulled out a sheet of his personal stationery. The letterhead bore his name in elegant script, Muhammad Ali. How many autographs had he signed with that name? How many inspirational messages had he written to sick children, to struggling athletes, to anyone who believed in the myth of his greatness? This would be his final letter, his last honest words. "To whom it may concern," he began, then stopped. The formality felt wrong. This wasn't a business correspondence or a public statement. This was a confession, raw and personal as blood. He crumpled the paper and started again. "My name is Muhammad Ali, and I killed a man." His hand froze over the words. Seeing them written in his own handwriting, shaky now from the Parkinson's but unmistakably his, made them real in a way that 47 years of nightmares hadn't. He was no longer a man haunted by what he might have done in a moment of rage. He was a confessed killer. The phone rang again. This time he didn't answer. Instead, he continued writing, the words flowing like a dam had burst. He wrote about Jerry Castellano, about the press conference, about the cruel words that had shattered something fundamental inside him. He wrote about the moment his hands found Jerry's throat, about the terrible ease with which a heavyweight champion's grip could crush a man's windpipe. He wrote about the Hudson River, black as sin in the February night, swallowing Jerry's body without a ripple. He wrote about the 47 years that followed, the victories tainted by guilt, the speeches about peace delivered by hands that had killed, the gradual construction of a legend built on the foundation of a lie. He wrote about the nightmares, about waking up screaming Jerry's name, about the way he flinched whenever anyone mentioned unsolved disappearances or cold cases. Most of all, he wrote about Jerry's daughter, a 7-year-old girl who'd become a woman without ever knowing what happened to her father, who'd lived her entire adult life in the shadow of abandonment because Muhammad Ali had been too cowardly to face the consequences of 30 seconds of rage. By the time he finished, the sun had moved across the sky, throwing long shadows through the study. The confession was 7 pages long, every detail meticulously recorded, every emotion laid bare. It read like what it was, the final testimony of a dying man desperate to unburden his soul. He sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote a single name on the front, Detective Sarah Castellano, NYPD. The irony was perfect, terrible in its symmetry. Jerry's daughter had grown up to become a police officer, dedicating her life to solving the kinds of mysteries her father's disappearance had created. She'd spent decades seeking justice for other families, never knowing that the answer to her own family's greatest question lived in the mouth of America's most beloved athlete. Ali had researched her years ago, driven by a guilt he couldn't name. Detective Sarah Castellano, 37 years old, decorated investigator, specialist in cold cases. She had Jerry's eyes, the same intelligent gleam that had recognized Ali's hypocrisy in that parking garage so many years ago. The doorbell rang, sharp and urgent. Through the study window, Ali could see an unmarked sedan in his driveway, its occupants still seated inside, watching the house with professional patience. They'd come, just as his tormentor had promised. The evidence had been delivered, the case had been opened, and now justice was finally coming to collect its debt. Ali stood slowly, the sealed confession in his trembling hand. In a few minutes, he would open that door and face Detective Castellano, Jerry's daughter, grown into the instrument of his reckoning. He would hand her the letter that would destroy everything he'd built and finally give her the truth she'd unknowingly spent her life seeking. The doorbell rang again, more insistent now. Ali walked toward it, each step carrying him closer to the end of Muhammad Ali the legend and the beginning of Muhammad Ali the confessed killer. His legs felt stronger than they had in years, as if the approaching confession had returned some essential vitality to his failing body. For the first time in 47 years, Muhammad Ali was about to tell the complete truth. The weight of that truth would crush everything beautiful the world believed about him. But it would finally free Jerry Castellano's daughter from a lifetime of wondering why her father never came home. As his hand reached for the doorknob, Ali whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for courage. The courage to face the woman whose life he'd destroyed before she was old enough to understand what loss meant. The greatest fight of his life was about to begin, and this time, losing was the only way to win. Ali's hand closed around the doorknob, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, the way time had stopped between rounds in championship fights, when everything hung in the balance and the next bell would determine history. He could feel his heart beating against his ribs with the same rhythm it had carried into the ring against Liston, against Frazier, against Foreman. The rhythm of a man about to face his destiny. He opened the door. Two figures stood on his porch, a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that he recognized immediately, and a younger man whose posture screamed federal agent. But it was the woman who held his attention, who made his breath catch in his throat like a physical blow. Jerry Castellano's eyes. Exactly as he'd feared and expected. Muhammad Ali? Her voice was steady, professional, but there was something underneath, a tremor that spoke of personal investment. I'm Detective Sarah Castellano, NYPD. This is Agent Morrison, FBI. We'd like to speak with you about a cold case. The words hit him like an uppercut to the solar plexus. Here she was, Jerry's daughter, standing on his doorstep with her father's eyes and her mother's jawline, carrying a badge that represented everything Ali had spent 47 years evading. Justice, truth, consequences, all wrapped in the form of a woman who'd grown up without a father because of 30 seconds of rage in a parking garage. I know why you're here, Ali said, his voice barely above a whisper. The confession burned in his left hand like a brand. I've been waiting. Detective Castellano's eyebrows rose slightly. Behind her, Agent Morrison shifted his weight, hand moving unconsciously toward his jacket. But Ali's attention remained fixed on Sarah's face, watching for the moment when she would see the truth written in his expression. Mr. Ali, we're investigating the 1975 disappearance of photographer Jerome Castellano. We have reason to believe you may have information relevant to the case. Jerome, Jerry's real name, the one his daughter would have known him by. The father who'd taken her to the park, who'd helped her with homework, who'd kissed her goodnight on February 15, 1975, never knowing it would be the last time. Ali felt tears burning his eyes, not for himself, but for the little girl this woman had been, waiting by windows for a man who would never come home. Detective Castellano, he said carefully, tasting the weight of her name. Your father, Jerome, he was investigating you. Her voice hardened, the professional mask slipping to reveal something raw underneath. He'd been following your career, documenting incidents of violence outside the ring. He believed you were dangerous. The irony cut deeper than any knife. Jerry hadn't been the opportunistic blackmailer Ali had painted him as in his memories. He'd been an investigative journalist, a man seeking truth, exactly like his daughter had become, and Ali had killed him for it. He was right, Ali said, extending the sealed envelope toward her with a trembling hand. Your father was right about everything. Sarah's eyes dropped to the envelope, then back to his face. Something in his expression must have conveyed the magnitude of what he was offering, because her professional composure cracked completely. For a moment, she wasn't Detective Castellano. She was a 7-year-old girl who'd spent 40 years wondering why Daddy never came home. What is this? She whispered. The truth. Ali's voice broke on the word. Everything that happened that night. Everything I did to your father. Everything I stole from you. Agent Morrison stepped forward, sensing the shift in the conversation's gravity. Mr. Ali, I should advise you that anything you say— I know my rights, Ali interrupted, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. I'm waiving them, all of them. This woman deserves to know what happened to her father, and I'm done being too cowardly to tell her. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for the envelope. When her fingers brushed his, Ali felt the full weight of 47 years crash down on him. This was Jerry's daughter, the baby girl whose future he'd destroyed in a moment of uncontrolled rage. The child who'd grown up believing her father had abandoned her because Muhammad Ali couldn't face the consequences of what he'd done. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words inadequate as dust in the face of what he'd taken from her. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You deserved better. You deserved the truth. You deserved your father. She opened the envelope with precise, careful movements, but Ali could see her hands trembling. As she began to read, her face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, horror, rage, and finally something that looked like relief. The terrible relief of questions finally answered, of a lifelong wound finally given a name. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. You killed him. Yes. With your bare hands. Yes. And you've been lying about it for 47 years. Ali closed his eyes, feeling the last of his strength leave him. Yes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, stood broken on his own doorstep, having just confessed to the daughter of his victim. Justice had finally found him. Sarah stared at the confession in her hands, the pages trembling like autumn leaves. Agent Morrison reached for his handcuffs, but she held up a hand to stop him. This moment belonged to her and the broken man before her, the man who had stolen her father and then spent 4 decades becoming a symbol of everything Jerry Castellano had died trying to expose. 47 years, she said, her voice hollow. 47 years I blamed myself. Thought maybe if I'd been better, if I hadn't cried when he left for work that morning, maybe he would have come home. Ali's face crumpled. The tremor in his hands spread through his entire body, the Parkinson's amplified by the weight of what he'd carried. Your father loved you. His last words, he said your name, Sarah. He was trying to get home to you. The lie was a small mercy, but Sarah saw through it immediately. She was too good a detective, had interrogated too many killers to miss the tell in his voice. But she didn't call him on it. Some truths were too sharp to bear. I need to understand, she said, stepping closer. Morrison tensed, but Ali made no move to flee or fight. He stood there like a man waiting for execution, which, Sarah realized, was exactly what he was. Help me understand how the man who refused to fight in Vietnam could murder my father in cold blood. Ali's eyes found hers, and in them she saw 47 years of torment. I was never the man they said I was. The peace, the principles, it was all performance. Underneath, I was just rage looking for a target. Your father saw that. He called me out and You what? I proved him right. The words came out like a physical wound. I became exactly the monster he said I was. Sarah folded the confession and slipped it into her jacket. The motion was deliberate, final, the last piece of evidence needed to close the case that had defined her life. She should feel triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, like a building after demolition. My mother died, thinking he abandoned us, she said. Cancer, 10 years ago. She went to her grave believing the man she loved was a coward who walked away from his family. Ali's knees buckled slightly. Morrison moved to steady him, but Ali waved him off. Some pain was meant to be felt in full. "I'm sorry," Ali whispered. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring him back." Her voice was ice, but tears still fell. "Sorry doesn't give me back 40 years of wondering. Sorry doesn't let me tell my mother she was wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to sense the weight of the moment, the air itself holding its breath. Ali stood before Jerry Castellano's daughter, stripped of legend, revealed as the broken man he'd always been beneath the performance. Finally, Sarah spoke. "You know what the worst part is? I became a cop because of you. Because I believed in the version of Muhammad Ali who stood for justice. I wanted to be like the man who wouldn't compromise his principles, even when it cost him everything." The irony was a knife that found its mark perfectly. Ali closed his eyes, feeling the last foundations of his carefully constructed identity crumble to dust. "What happens now?" he asked. Sarah looked at Morrison, then back at Ali. The man before her was already dying, the Parkinson's eating away at him day by day, his body betraying him the same way his rage had betrayed Jerry 47 years ago. Prison would be a formality, a place to wait for death. "Now you pay," she said simply. "Not the way my father paid, quick and violent. You'll pay the way I did, day after day, year after year, until there's nothing left." She turned to Morrison. "Read him his rights, all of them." As the handcuffs clicked around Ali's wrists, hands that had once been blessed instruments of athletic poetry, now revealed as weapons of murder, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Not peace exactly, but the absence of the weight he'd carried. The terrible relief of a secret finally told. "Detective Castellano," he said as Morrison led him toward the car. "Your father was a good man. Whatever else I destroyed, I want you to know that. He was trying to protect people from men like me." Sarah watched from the porch as they loaded Muhammad Ali into the back of the sedan. The greatest heavyweight champion of all time, the man who'd floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee, reduced to a broken old man in handcuffs. The legend was dead. Only the truth remained. As the car pulled away, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed her partner. "It's me," she said when he answered. "Close the Castellano file. We got him." She hung up and stood alone on Ali's porch, feeling the weight of 47 years finally lifting from her shoulders. Justice had found its way home at last.